in a room full of teachers who are working with young people who are, just at the beginning of that kind of journey. I wonder if you could give us some insight into the impact of learning about art in the state of Queensland.
Again, I just want to say thank you so much, because what will unravel, I think, within this Q&A thing is how important it is that there are people like yourself here. I worked at the gallery from 2000 to 2008. I was an exhibition designer, but the more I was here, the realization and one of the biggest passions that I've taken away from me is audience engagement, and how do we use an art piece to teach and inform and activate outside of the space in a culturally appropriate way, particularly when working with sensitive materials and ideas. And I think that's why I love collaborating and getting the chance to live or walk within someone else's shoes is the greatest way to learn about each other. And fundamentally, I holistically really believe in that idea that our quality exists through the acceptance of difference, not through things being the same. And it's a big philosophy behind kind of not only how I work, but how I live my life. And I kind of also feel, I don't know the kind of artist I want to be, but through working at the gallery, I know the kind of artist I don't want to be. And then to kind of to live by that kind of guideline. But it was in high school, that I had an amazing art teacher who realized, I think, what I was looking at and the kind of work that I was doing and the things that I were engaging with were not necessarily part of the art curriculum that was given to me. I think I had an art teacher that probably off her own accord found material that was more suitable to what I was doing and what I was looking at. And subsequently, I spent 4 days a week at a regular school and 1 day a week at an art college. Like, I was really, really passionately engaged with art from a very, very young age. And I guess having someone see that but nourish it through the idea of this implementation of me going to a different school 1 day a week was really super important. So, my introduction to art, was something that happened very seriously, very young in my life, and I'm really grateful for that. I genuinely believe in a very simple premise that art can change the world, and that is only through the fact of what it has done to me. And if it can do that to me, then it can do that to anyone.
Yep.
And then it was after high school, still very, very interested in where that kind of art what it would go. I still had no idea what an artist even did. But I was very fortunate to then, wanted to study further within university, and at the Griffith University, the Queensland College of Art, they have a course that is a Bachelor of Visual Art majoring in Contemporary Australian Indigenous Art, which coincidentally is here in Brisbane in Queensland. It is the only university accredited art degree just for Aboriginal people. So the premise of it, all the lecturers, everyone associated with the core of the group is Aboriginal. It has, there's no kind of prerequisite to go there. So it understands that, for a lot of Aboriginal people, the opportunity to even finish high school might not be a possibility. So, you don't have to finish high school to go to the course. There's a lot of things. A lot of the students are a much more mature age. They realize that, a lot of people have families or community responsibilities, and sometimes in the Aboriginal art world, like emerging artists are like in their 80s, or, you get handed over this cultural responsibilities, and maybe not too much, Sally Gabori comes to mind as an amazing example of that, didn't pick up a paintbrush till she was in her 80s. So the fundamental nature of that course was really super important, I think, for me. And then how I started at the gallery was through a traineeship. for a show called Story Place. Yes, if Brisbane people might know, it's a very, very long time ago, which was Indigenous art of Cape York and the rainforest. So I was 2 years into my university degree, and this opportunity came up, and I thought, oh, wouldn't that be wonderful to, you know, a lot of people, family members were in that show. And I was like, oh, this is really cool. My understanding of a traineeship was, you know, you work for a year for basically for free. But the, you know, I'd never worked, so the traineeship wage, I just thought like I was a millionaire. I was very, very excited. But it was the premise, oh, I'm going to have a year's work and I'll go back to university. And as I said, 8 years later, I was still attached to the institution at the point of still maintaining a practice, still, like as I said in the show, you know, working on these things. The Headhunter, those works were done, you know, whilst I was working here. I had commercial representation, but it very much got to, I think, a point I had to decide, do I want to be an academic within the institution or do I want to be an artist in my own right? And I kind of drove that as far as I could to the cross path of it had to be one or the other. I think to wholeheartedly give what I wanted to one or the other. And of course I chose, you know, to be an artist and set myself up in a way of knowing I wanted to do that. I kind of looked, you know, oh, I might have 2 years to survive before I crawl back to the gallery and ask for my job back. But I set myself up in this position to, you know, to kind of really give it a go.
One point you made in there around you fundamentally believe that art can change the world, and that's from your own lived experience. And I'm assuming within that it's not just you personally who've benefited from art, but your art practice, you can see that it's had benefit for others and with others. One thing I think we talk a lot about when we're talking about art teaching and creativity in schools, and you know, things like STEM and STEAM and all of that sort of business that goes on amongst teachers, is, you know, thinking about, well, what is the fundamental value of the arts and arts learning. So just wanting to riff off that point you've raised around art being able to change the world, what is it about art specifically that has capacity to change or to influence and inspire that maybe other disciplines can't? What is it that you've seen in putting artwork out into the universe that's made meaning, made a difference?
I mean, the response to having a show like this, you know, is really incredible. Unfortunately, it is so few and far between. I'm so, like, grateful for this opportunity. I do not know another Aboriginal person that has had a solo institutional show, like their own. I don't know. They could.
We had Sally Gabori.
Sally, well,
yep,
as a, you know, 90 years old. Like, my goodness. I hope, you know, that. You know, opportunities for Australian artists are so restricted and don't happen. I recently had this pivotal, amazing moment at the Jenny Watson opening at the MCA. Jenny is a really senior Australian artist, a female, has done things like Venice, has had a career that's gone like trajectorily amazing. But when she got up and spoke as, I thought, a senior figure in contemporary art and expressed her gratitude at the opportunity to have a show, and the fact she said, the next solo show I have, I won't be around for it. Like, really hit home for me. I was like, you know, we have these great blockbuster shows, and you know, there's nothing wrong with them. You know, but the insurance value alone could give 10 Australian artists an opportunity to show. And I love the fact that my show coincided with Patricia's show as well, having two Australian artists, a female artist, and an Aboriginal artist, and really, you know, it is getting numbers through the door. It's not, you know, the people are engaged, people are interested, people want to see what is happening from, you know, these stories attached to where they live and where they come from in the collector basis sense as well. And having my upbringing here, like, you know, 20 years ago, you could buy my work for, like, you know, a piece of chicken. Like, it was. There are many people live and work in Brisbane that own my work as well, that have followed that trajectory and, you know, continue to be supportive, even, you know, at a much greater level. And that has been something really important. But, the point of what I'm saying is that access to these opportunities is so small that, when we do have audience come through and see and understand, I mean, that really does mean a lot to me. And I've based myself in Brisbane for the 4 months while the show is on. I want to be here for these kind of opportunities and this kind of engagement. I want to be able to work with kids when they come through the doors and kind of give more insight and stuff to that. So for me, it's not so much the evidence from examples I have. Again, it's going back to witnessing things. I didn't come into an art institution until I was an adult. And I often wonder how it would be if I did, and what opportunities. I get almost envious when I see young people in these institutions and to grow up understanding a collection. Because I also view galleries as, like state galleries, as extension of our living room walls. Like we have a premise and understanding that we own everything in this building. And unfortunately, and not enough people think like that, in particular the people I'm really interested in are the people who actually don't get into institutions or feel they are inaccessible, that that you have to wear a certain clothing to get in, or you might have to pay money to get in, or people generally don't even know this place exists. Are more of my interest. But it was, for me, it was the Scarred for Life series by Tracy Moffat, seeing that and literally feeling like someone had reached in and got a piece of me. Like that is how, I think, amazingly, at its best, how art can be truly effective. And that pivotal moment was for me, that understanding art does just not have to be this beautifully executed image. That art has the power to say something, to transcend race, religion, culture, gender. And that's why I generally have that belief.
There's so much in that. I wish we could just keep drilling into that alone. But like I said, I do want to open it up to the floor. So the potentially last question I'll ask is not so much a question, but really just a chance to think about the title of the exhibition, the idea of visible. And I just want to share yesterday, just because it's fresh for me, myself and Regional Services Officer here, Henry Van Nordenberg, went to visit a spot north of Toowoomba because we're running a workshop, and this is why I want to share it with the teacher community. We are running a workshop at the Bunya Mountains soon, and we had the great opportunity of connecting with Paul Dawson, who's General Manager for the Bunya People's Aboriginal Corporation. And when we went to visit the spot where he's based, it just seemed like such a sort of standard, property. And when we arrived there, he pointed out that they'd only recently, sort of 20 years ago, discovered that there were, that it was a site for ritual, and there were sort of stone formations that were dating back 6,000 years. You look across the paddock and you see that, but if you didn't have someone tell you that, it would be invisible, right? So I think also we think a lot about Judy Watson's work, Toro, out the front of GOMA now, because that's also in that same spirit of saying, well, we've done the research, and she's trying to make something visible for people right out the front of this huge building. So this idea of visible is really on my mind in terms of our role as educators to make, these same issues that you're raising more visible, even though they may have been staring you in the face the whole time. Are you able to sort of reflect now that the show's been open for a while? Do you feel like it's been understood, that idea of visible? Has there been any sort of commentary coming to you around, or when you've been doing, the huge amount of public programs you've been doing for this program? How is that, the way it's anchored around the title visible, come through?
I think really well. It's been a really positive feedback. The idea of visible, also alludes to things like hidden history. And I still, think that one big thing within my work, I think, is a search for historical truth. And I think, Australia as a country has a lot to answer for. And, particularly within the education system, the way things are presented, or just the history that we have to work with is, for better words, of it incredibly problematic. Something that comes to mind for me was the opportunity to do the War Memorial in Hyde Park in Sydney, and that was based on my own, family experience. But my grandfather went to World War II. He was a prisoner of war in Germany, escaped with 6 other men over the border of Italy to a farming town called Biella. They were recaptured by Italian troops, sentenced to execution. 3 of the men were shot before an officer in charge said that they're British allies and had to be returned to Germany, which they were. 4 survivors, including my grandfather. When the war ceased, ended, they were returned to the English infantry. They flew back to England and got a boat back to Australia. I mean, it's an incredible story. When servicemen and women returned to Australia, they were given land as settlement for their participation. Aboriginal men and women not only not given that land, they were still getting their land taken off them. We celebrate Anzac Day, every year in this very, almost jingoistic way. And I'm, not saying that those men and women don't deserve any of that celebration, but that history that we are taught and understand, and that those people that, go and, all over the world in honor of that, no one looks at, no one thinks of that, no one questions that. Actually, the Boer War in 1903-04, there's over 60 Aboriginal men buried in South Africa. The White Australia policy came in after their deployment, and they weren't allowed back into this country. This is all history that is not. This is the hidden history, these stories are so important. And I look at something, why I use the Anzac one, is that it's something that is so celebrated and understood, and as I'm saying, as it should be. But we have to understand that there's a whole subcategory or people dehumanized through that. And I look at that as a great way of coming together in bringing that understanding and, and a way of celebrate being together under a common premise of that is something that I looked at as, why, I chose maybe that as this entry forum in looking at these very, very hard issues. But yeah, I think the subtext to what I'm saying is that who is left to write history and how is it written is something that's really important. And I'm someone who likes to think I'm informed. I read the paper every day, but I question a lot of things that I read, because I understand, who it is that owns the media and what do they want you to think and understand. So it's always taking it's like title, bringing something in and then and then exhaling and then really thinking about what is that's happening in this new story, and where am I taking those visual clues or written clues from, and how do I then interpret it? So it's always with an element of not so much skepticism, but just being wary of what I read.
Again, so much in that, but I guess what I'm taking away from it is also thinking about the importance of research and researching widely and having that critical lens, and also, again, thinking about that fundamental value of art and an artist to be able to do all of that research, on a daily basis and really live it, but then also use art and process to sort of, as you said before, transcend and sort of transform. So going through so much process to produce work that's on many levels so accessible because it's familiar yet unfamiliar. I would really like now to be able to open up, and we do have roaming mic, which we're keen for people to use for the benefit of the recording.
Hi, Tony. I'd just like to ask a question that goes right back to the beginning of your conversation. And that was when you were speaking about the teacher that you had, your art teacher. Would you mind elaborating a little on what she or he did to actually engage you outside of the set curriculum, please? That's very interesting to me.
I think what I was doing was looking at a number of maybe more politically engaged artists. Keeping in mind there was like 2 books that existed. There's so much more material now, which is great. But even drawing me premise to 2 artists like Tracy and Gordon, which are now like. I think almost fundamentally included within the educational realm of looking at issues pertaining to art that has something much more engaging and something to say. But I think I guess it would have become evident at maybe what I was looking at, the kind of images that I was creating and making, that it was quite different, I think, to what other students were doing. And I guess the fact that I wasn't left to just do that, or it wasn't expressed to me to either change what I was doing or follow a program that was set. It was actually realizing that it could happen alongside what everyone else was doing and could be encouraged. And I think for that teacher, that did mean extra groundwork for them as well, which is why, I express gratitude for people that are here, but for someone to realize on a par how, important that was. And that, I think even now it could happen on a number of different tangents. My sister and I were the only Aboriginal children at the school. I guess it could have quite easily gone a very different way for me, but I really do believe it was that extra work that I think the teacher would have had to put into play, and extra research outside of what she was doing, in engaging with me in through visual art, looking at other artists, maybe having a different understanding, or researching other things. And this is like couldn't just Google things. I know it's probably the accessibility of these kind of things is much easier. Programs set in place through educational kits with the gallery are another amazing thing, but it still strikes me as pretty incredible the amount of teachers that probably don't even use this kind of accessible network of being able to do things. And I've heard real horror stories from teachers as well, in particular with Indigenous students, that it's kind of, and they're ashamed sometimes that they say it, but they toe the party line and they're just left, there's no further engagement or anything. It's just, they're it's really a system that is set up to fail us. It was for introducing me to artists that were looking at the issues that I was looking at.
Thank you. I teach prep to grade 6, so small children who are always bringing their treasures in to show you. I'm interested in your collection. To start something like that when you were 6 years old and continue it through, was it nurtured by your family or resisted? I mean, often children's collections end up stacked in boxes in their parents' houses, under their parents' houses, and never looked at again. What was the impetus in your family that kept that going?
It was really nurtured in my family. It wasn't seen as possibly the greatest thing. A bit. It's still, even now, even my career is quite confronting to my family. I think there is a lot of anxiety or pressure, but I think it exists a lot because of their fear for how someone like me is perceived rather than the reality of it. But as I said, this was a long time ago. My sister and I went to, it was the Bjelke-Petersen era as primary school. I vividly remember wearing those leotards that Flo designed. No, my parents actually, remember being in the grandstand and seeing my sister marching in unison, smiling but just thinking, oh my God, this is so wrong. And we loved it, mind you. So I think I had parents that really just let us do what we wanted. And the collection definitely wasn't something, as I said, I displayed things everywhere all the time. And it was something that I think I'm trying to think of, it's not the right words of saying it, but it was something that, whilst I think it would have been discouraged in a way, they just let me do what I wanted to do. So there wasn't a push or emphasis towards it. They didn't actively help me seek things out or buy things for me, which I think would have been the next, evolutionary step in fostering that kind of thinking or something, or bringing me to art galleries. We had no art in the house, and the idea of coming to an art gallery would be preposterous. So that never happened. But for us, it was such, we were, parents worked, we were home by ourselves, we sat in the car and with the other kids, and we had that kind of upbringing. But yeah, it wasn't fostered, but it wasn't rejected. Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know where. Is that okay to add? Yeah. Yeah. Mm.
Hi, Tony. I just wanted to ask about this idea of your work being controversial. And I think for myself and everyone else in the room, I don't see it that way, and see it more like, as Terry was talking about, as making things more visible and shining a light on what already exists and the prejudices and things that occur in our society as they are. But I'm interested in the responses that you get for your work along those lines, and whether you've had unexpected or expected attitudes and prejudices and responses to your work, and whether you felt censored at times. As teachers, we sometimes feel censored in terms of what we can do, and it depends on our context, I suppose. I'm just wondering if you could speak to that a little.
Sure. Controversial is something that interests me a lot. I look at the idea, there's controversial and there's confronting. I don't find anything controversial about historical truth. I don't think that anything what I'm doing is controversial. If you are confronted by it, that is okay. And I completely accept and understand that. But when someone says that it's controversial, I'm kind of am interested. So what is controversial about it? Like what, where does that exist? In what manner? Why? So there is a backlash to this kind of thing. Anything that addresses Aboriginal issues in this country has an element of backlash to it. If I am represented in the media, there's been a lot of media coverage, like mainstream media, I get crucified in the comments. And I don't even want anyone to kind of log on to those kind of things and read it. It's horrible, and it has a really bad stronghold on me. I hate the way that I react. I hate the fact that I just can't read that stuff and just let it go. that it is from someone who doesn't know me, has not seen the show, will never come and see the show, but has very firm ideas on the placement of Aboriginal people in this country, and the kind of thing I do makes that person very uncomfortable in their understanding of where I should sit within the rung of society and where I actually sit in the rung of society. And so that's, you know, something I'm very, very wary of. I'm very aware that I sit socially as well in this very small little bubble. And it doesn't take me very far outside of this premise to get outside of that bubble and understand where I sit in this society as an Aboriginal person. So I think I know I exude or have a presence, or, you know, I love my life and everything about it, but and I try to be quite optimistic in the face of adversity, but, you know, very honestly, there is some very hard realizations that I know and I accept and have ways of dealing with it. And the critique, you know, I think quite often we preach to the converted, and that the audience that is coming inside here and is looking at the work, again, it's not necessarily the audience I think should be seeing it, but it's an audience that the kind of people that are writing and critiquing it online is very different from. And that's why I think it's so important, you know, for children to engage with it and understand, because they are going to be the ones that change their mind or feel an opportunity to escape the presence of what a family, a pre-existed idea of how you need to act or react. And interesting, you know, I have people all the time that say, oh, my father is just the most racist person in the world. Like, but, you know, they do not think or act. They just deal with the fact that that's happened, and that you know, then the next generation it'll change, and these things filter and change. But yeah, it is something that you know, I'm incredibly aware of, and at times it has taken its toll on me. And one of the answers to that, you know, I cannot read social commentary or comments. In my studio, I've received letters from people that are really, really awful. I keep them all. And for me, that's important. I don't know what I'll do or if I'll ever, but I've just kept them all, and it grows. You know, it's not a good thing, but it happens. Yeah.
I just want to jump in there and riff off part of that question when Katie mentioned that teachers can come up against barriers too when they do go into confronting territory and depending on context. And I think why it's such a great opportunity to pause on that point with yourself, Tony, having shared, you know, the challenges that you face with such, you know, truth and in what you've shared there. For us all to understand more fully. What is it that you can recommend in terms of you know, persevering in the face of that if you are teaching those confronting truths, and how do, you know, because I understand full well myself, as all the teachers here will understand as well, hence why they're here, is again that role that art education can play in going to topics that may not be raised in other disciplines, but then there is that hesitation or lack of confidence that teachers might have in going into contemporary Indigenous Australian art issues, for fear of protocol and all of those factors. Is there anything, sort of words of advice or even encouragement that you can pass on to our teachers here today?
I always think, you know, for me and the background within the institution as well, is do it and fail and get better at it than not do it at all. And so much is about just not doing it for fear. And that fear is very legitimate. I mean, I've seen people get crucified by our people, you know, and I know that it happens. But, you know, you can only get better at that kind of engagement. And I think, you know, once upon a time, you know, it's like, well, let's engage with Aboriginal art. Kids, let's do dot paintings. You know, we know that that is not the best way of bringing out the conceptual ideas behind it. It's about understanding space and place, what is important to you, the environment in which you live in. It's pulling that apart, and it can only be done through, you know, these kind of forums. And it's not going to happen within the education system teaching you that. It's the individual wanting to be better at it. And, you know, my thing is do it and fail and get better at it. And you know, but hopefully we don't fail at it, that there are moments that can happen, and you know, I think there's greater things happening now that, you know, we can access and do things. But, you know, for me, even giving a student an artist that they will respond to. You know, Tracy for me was that series of Scarred for Life, which is human. It's not an Aboriginal story. I mean, that goes into things like domestic violence and sexuality. There's a little boy giving birth to the doll in it. The little kids are cutting the lawn with the scissors as punishment. The mother finding the birth certificate, the daughter finding the birth certificate, and realizing that the man who she knew as her father wasn't her father. Like, and I think these all, I mean, I couldn't even imagine as a teacher, it's those stories that are probably evident in students that they don't even realize or understand. But that being in tune of what is happening out here and taking that to students, you know, I think is really incredible and admirable. But that you know, for me, just being given those artists and realizing that, you know, I was not alone anymore, that there's someone that story replicated mine, which is gonna happen with everyone. There's you know, a whole niche of people that fit within that and are doing that. Just something, you know, with some people it could be a writer or a poet or a director. You know, for me that response is something visual, because it's something that sometimes we cannot talk about as well, that it's, you know, an ingrained, either it's a sense of fear or even a lack of understanding as a teenager, you know, just those thoughts and feelings. And when you see it articulated visually, I mean, it's a very, very special, significant moment. And that's, you know, I'm really saying, because the greatest thing for me was really seeing those visual images and feeling just that I wasn't alone anymore. It's, yeah.
Very, powerful. Thank you. We have time for one more question.
Thank you. Hi, Tony. I think you've kind of just answered my question, actually. My question was about cultural appropriation, and as a non-Indigenous person and trying to facilitate an authentic understanding of Indigenous work in my high school art students. Some of the processes that I'm undertaking, and in some ways I feel like I need them to be endorsed by an Indigenous person and to check, or whether, you know, my filtered understanding and attempting to educate myself around Indigenous art is enough of a start to sort of have those conversations happening in a class. And I'd actually be really interested in showing you a collaborative Year 8 artwork that we've created recently, and whether sort of the approach that I'm taking is trying to move beyond just simply sort of cultural appropriation, and is starting to develop an understanding within my students. But yeah, you're saying just having a go and sort of starting at something and hopefully getting better at it as we go along. But yeah, I was going to ask if you had any sort of suggestions about really providing the students with a genuine experience beyond, oh, here's a sheet of Indigenous symbols, put them into an artwork, and here's a concentric circle. Yeah.
I've just thought of something really interesting also, is that probably engaging with Indigenous students sometimes with the activity or the work is that they probably have more authority on doing the things than you as the teacher, I guess. But I'm always like, what you can do with any artwork, and as I'm saying, even, you know, a desert painting of country, is understanding what is going on in the picture. And that's what I said about, a sense of space and place. It's about a complete knowledge and understanding of a system in which the artist works in. And it's so, to me, my work is probably a little easier to unravel in that the issues are very present inside the artwork itself. But if you really spend time with any work and strip outside, I guess, what is visually going on to what is actually conceptually happening with it, all those things are just fundamental human elements of existence. Where I think we get into a lot of problems and appropriation is just the complete copying of work. And why that fails on a number of levels, but in particular just the replication of imagery, is that it's not going into any of the ideas that are attached to what the artist is saying. And a big part of what I did here and what I love doing is stripping back all those issues and saying, well, how can a child engage with this artwork without actually just copying it? And if it is just a direct copy, then you can do an activity that completely engages with the theme works of an artwork, and that the aftermath of it, or the finished product, all individually and uniquely, you wouldn't even know that they're attached to the artwork that the idea comes from. If you're looking at holistically at, well, how would I respond to this situation? What space and place do I live in, and why is it important to me? What connections and relationships am I making with that? With 10 people, there's going to be 10 different answers to that, yet the work on the wall, is the same stimulus and source material for each one of those ideas engaging with the work. And that's, on one level. Then there's all, the other thing, I guess, about, lots of people can understand or feel what it's like to be targeted, no matter where you come. The situation might be very different in its understanding. Actually, I can't think of the artist, did an alphabet book, just A to Z. It was with African-American artists, privileged kind of private school, and then another group of people, but for each letter, what collectively they represented was so diverse in its meaning from that background, but it was their own response to it. And we know that privilege and that stigma and that change in where we sit within society is different, but those responses are, I think, equally as valid. And you only hope that through that you get a sense. I think one of the biggest things for me is not just this, not the association we have to disadvantage, is our understanding of privilege as well. It's very easy to look at and understand disadvantage. It's much harder for us to look at ourselves as being privileged. And so those are things, that I find interesting and I think about a lot. But it's really, sitting in front of an artwork, doing the research which exists. But the worst case is just, us sitting in front of it and picking apart and pulling apart what is the core of what is going on here, and how then can we engage with that with students.
Okay, round of applause for Tony. Thank you.